All right, lesson 3. Lesson 3 is going to focus on layers. So in this lesson, we're going to make a classic 1980s style portrait collage using 18th century French paintings. In the process, we'll learn what adjustment layers, fill layers, and blending modes are. At the end of the chapter, we'll discuss a handful of the varying file formats used in art and design. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's start by opening up our base image and cleaning it up a little bit and then expanding it to fit the additional figures we're going to be adding. So let's go to File, Open, navigate to Chapter 3, and we want our smiling figure. Where is he? Decroix. There we go. And we'll do Open. And when we look at this image, this is a photograph of a painting from 1700s. Like if we zoom in, we can see that there's all these kind of nasty little scratches on here. There's some good detail, but like we want to get rid of this kind of noise that's throughout the image. Now we could go through with the remove tools, which we haven't really covered yet, and kind of manually pull out those little marks, but it would take far too long. So we are going to use a compromise, which is a filter. So we're going to come up to Filter, and we're going to go to Noise, and we're going to go to Dust and Scratches, which is for removing dust and scratches, not adding them, for removing them. Now the base setting on this of 1 and 0 will work well for us. When we have one of these little windows, by the way, this will be like a zoom in. So like if we click here on his eye, it will load his eye up into this area. And if we click on and off, we can see the effect that it is having. Similarly, we can click preview on and off to see the effect it's having on our main image. We can see that it greatly reduces, but not fully removes a lot of that noise. We could bump it up to like 2 or 3 to remove more of it. We can see that we start losing a lot of detail in the figure. So 1 in this case will work fairly well. Threshold just looks at like the difference of the pixels. So if we turn this all the way up, we can see that it keeps a lot of that, keeps more of that in there. Versus when we have it down at 0, it will try to remove more. And all this is doing is that it's looking at pixels next to each other, and ones that are dissimilar, it's making more similar. So we're going to go ahead and click OK. And we've got our initial cleanup. Now, for our image to be successful, we want it to be bigger to fit our other two figures. So we want to enlarge this image. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control minus a few times to give myself some additional room. And you know what? I'm going to hold down Spacebar and bring this down a little bit because I'm going to be expanding it this way up towards the top left. Now, just like what we did in Chapter 1, I'm going to go ahead and hit C for the Crop tool, or make the Crop tool active over here in the top left. Up here where it says Fill Background by default, we'll go ahead and leave it there. We want Generative Expand. So go ahead and switch this to, Content Aware. Let's do Content Aware Fill. And we'll want it at a standard aspect ratio from photography. So where it says ratio, I'm going to pick 4:5 or 8:10. This will also help it feel more like a photograph because it's following a standard frame size. And I'm going to click and drag over this top left corner. I'm going to drag up. And I'm not going to drag sideways. I want to drag it in portrait still. I'm going to drag until the hand is about centered in that rule of third line running towards the bottom of the image, about like so. And I will click Done. Since we had Content Aware Fill turned on, we can see that it added images here, added stuff in here. And this is pretty common. So like in Chapter 1, we had additional background from the original image that we could expand. This one didn't have any additional background, so we asked Photoshop to make it up for us. And the difference between content and generative, by the way, is that Content Aware Fill will only use stuff that is present in the image to expand, versus Generative Expand will use anything that's in Adobe's AI system to expand out that, and sometimes adding new or novel stuff to that. More on that in a later lesson, but for now, we're just going to stick with Content Aware Fill. Let's go ahead and fit this on our screen, and I'm going to just hit Command 0 to fit it back on my screen. And so I'm not fighting with the Crop tool. I'm going to go ahead and hit V and switch back to the Move tool. Now we're going to make a series of different types of layers so we can look at the different kinds of layers in Photoshop. Then we're going to delete most of them and then get started on the actual meat of this. To make it a little bit easier to see what we're doing, I'm going to come over to my Layers panel, and I'm going to click on where it says Layers and drag it out. And I can either just leave it floating, or I can add it to a column by mousing over an edge right here until I see those blue lines to add it as its own space. All right, let's add a bunch of layers so we can see what they look like. So first, let's go ahead and click on the half circle down here in the Layers panel, which is our different types of layers. We can see we've got 4 groupings of them right here. We've got kind of our solid colors and fills. We've got our brightness, contrast, and basically like how bright the image adjustments. We have our main color adjustments, although sometimes this will also affect lights and darks. And then we have our kind of specialized uses down here like invert and posterize and so on. And gradient map, which can be a fun way of adding color to your image. This is fairly advanced. Like if you do a lot of photo processing, gradient map might be a really useful thing, or certain types of painting will use gradient map as well. For us right now, let's go ahead and add a brightness and contrast layer. When we have what we call an adjustment layer, and a lot of these, not all of them, are adjustment layers, which can also be found over here in adjustments. There's a whole list of them. What adjustment layers do is change the appearance of our image. And so when the layer is active, I can click and drag to change its appearance. And there'll be a little symbol right here telling me which one it is. So in this case, there's a little sun right here telling me that this is a brightness and contrast layer. So go ahead and brighten the image up just a little bit so we can see the effect of it. It doesn't really matter what it is because, again, we'll be nuking this here in a second. Next, let's add a fill layer. So like this is just going to be a solid color. So I'm going to come down to the bottom of my layers panel. I'll click on the half circle and I'll pick solid color. When I choose solid color, it'll give me the color picker window, which is a way of just quickly picking colors. I'm going to grab a red and by just clicking in here, and I'll click OK. Now, when I have a layer like this, each layer has a couple of attributes if it's filling in, if it's not adjusting. So like this was our adjustment. This one's a solid color. Same thing with our background. This one's, a solid image. And for these, we have opacity and we have fill. And right now, these are going to function about the same. More on what the difference is here in a minute. But opacity is it translucent? So like if I type in 50%, we can see that I can see through the image. And fill will do exactly the same thing in this case. Because we don't have any layer styles applied yet. So if I do fill and I do 50%, we can see that it is that same kind of thing where it's semi-translucent. We also have right here where it says normal, which is blending modes, which is how it interacts with the layers underneath it. And we'll dig more into these later, but basically it changes how the layer will affect the one underneath it. So like there's broadly some darkening ones, some brightening ones, a mix of the two, and then some special case uses down here. The ones you use most of the time and the ones we'll look at more closely in later chapters is multiply, screen, and overlay, although hue and color and so on can also be fairly useful. So let's go ahead and just change this one to multiply, which will darken the image by this red, creating kind of a nice red fill for this. Next, and we've already made one of these, is we can make a text layer. So I can hit T for text tool. We won't be able to find text layers here because that's not the kind of layers that we can make from there. And so if I click, I get some text, yay. And on this text, I can apply certain things called layer styles. So if I come over to my layer panel with the text layer still active, I can click this little FX dude right here. And I have another menu of layer styles. And these are really useful. So like we have stroke. And stroke is exactly what it sounds like. It's a stroke around the edge of the image, although mine's currently set to inside. Let's set you outside. And we can see that this kind of like in meme text adds a color around the outside of our image. So like this is a different way of doing what we did in chapter 2, where we did it based off of selections. Similarly, we can do things like drop shadows, which adds a shadow behind our text, depending on how we have it set up. Like it'll be a little hard to see on here with that huge stroke that we've got going. But basically, it's a way of adding a quick shadow behind it to help offset it from the background. Next, we have vector shapes. So if I come over to my toolbar and I go down to the box, this is a vector shape. In our case, let's just quickly throw one in here by clicking and dragging. And then finally, let's add in another image so we can see what that looks like as well. So I come up to File and I do Place Embedded and just grab any old image. It doesn't really matter right now because, again, we're going to delete this out here in a second. And you're a little big. I'm going to make you small so we can see these other things as we're working. And we have most of the kinds of layers that you'll see. So we have our normal background layer down here. We have an adjustment layer with a symbol telling us this is an adjustment. We have a fill layer, and it kind of shows us what the fill looks like. We have a text layer with layer styles applied. We have a vector shape. That's what this little symbol right here tells me. And then we have a smart object added to our image. A smart object means that I can do things like transform it, make it bigger and smaller and so on, without it discarding or getting rid of information from it. So it's a way of being able to non-destructively do those kinds of edits. Similarly, anything out of here can be applied non-destructively to a smart layer. Irritatingly, you'll probably at some point come across a thing where you're using like a brush tool and you come to a smart layer and it says no. And see, we get this warning right here. And so then we would have to rasterize it in order to be able to make marks on it. So notice that that symbol went away. That means that if I do things like transformations to it, they're no longer non-destructive. I'm just hitting Command Z a couple of times. Vectors are a special kind of thing. We'll look more at them when we get to Illustrator and a couple other chapters. But it's a special kind of shape in Photoshop that has additional attributes to it that allow you to, oops, I have the wrong layer active, that allow you to do special kinds of edits to these, like grab individual control points and be able to modify that kind of thing very quickly. Same thing with fill, color, and stroke, and so on. Now, over here in our text layer, I really want to take a quick look at this FX, because this FX is ways of adding those kind of drop shadows and things to our image. But this is also where we're going to see differences between fill and opacity. So if I modify the opacity for my text layer, if these on here, we can see that everything starts fading away. Versus if I do it to just fill, we can see that the stroke, which was an effect I applied, doesn't fade away. But the layer contents, the regular contents of it, the text in this case, do fade away. So that's where we can start seeing differences between fill and opacity. For color layers, if I double click on it, we can see that I have the ability to, again, quickly change the color, which is really handy. And I can, at any point, come back to an adjustment layer and make further changes to it, which is a way of doing these changes non-destructively. Also in the layers panel, I have a little eyeball, which allows me to turn a layer on and off so I can hide it. I can also make a layer not easy to interact with. So like this background layer is locked. So if I wanted to be able to interact with it, I would need to click the lock, and then I can start putzing around with it and doing other things with it. I also have this chain link. So we have a layer mask and we have our layer content. So if at any point I need to be able to move my contents separate from my mask, I can turn this link on and off to do so. You'll also occasionally see these little arrows allowing you to collapse down certain parts of your layer. Up here at the top, we also have ways of saying what we want to lock about our layers. Like if I want to not be able to move it, I can just click here, versus if I just want to have no interaction with it, I can just lock it by clicking on that spot as well. All right, let's go ahead and undo all of these changes. And we've done a lot. So, like hitting Command Z would take a long time. So what we can do instead is we can expand out our history panel, which is a step-by-step recording of every single change that we've done to the image. It also allows us to very quickly and easily return to the open state of the image. So if I wanted to return to the open state, I could click right here at the very start, taking me back to the initial appearance of my image. In this case, I want to go all the way back to that content-aware crop. So I'm going to click in my history panel, content-aware crop. Now, just like in the Marvel movies or other movies with time travel, if I go back into the past, but then I go and change something, so let's just turn this layer on and off. Oops, got to unlock it first. Oops, that works too. We can see that that removes the old future. And so I start working down a new future timeline. So if you go back in time in your history panel and you make a change, you'll lose the ability to travel back into the future. So be careful when using the history panel. But again, history panel is pretty handy. Since this chapter is going to be very layer heavy, I'm going to go ahead and leave my layers panel out so we can see what we're doing as I'm moving along. All right, this painting looks a little dark to me, so let's brighten it. So I'm going to come over to adjustments, or I could click the half circle down here at the bottom of the layers panel. It will do the same thing. Or actually, you can also come up to layer and go to new adjustment layer and pick brightness and contrast. Just if you pick it from the layer menu up here, you'll get this first question right here, and you'll just have to click OK. That's only the real difference you'll see when clicking from here or from the adjustments panel. So let's brighten it up a wee bit. We'll do 20. And being able to identify how much you need to brighten something or what changes you need to make is difficult to train. There'll be a lot of demos of what that looks like throughout these lessons. But if you struggle to see that, that's probably the hardest part after learning the technical aspects of Photoshop to working in Photoshop, is like what needs to be changed about an image. And I'll demo most of those kind of changes throughout the different lessons in this textbook. Okay, so let's go ahead and add in our other two images. And why don't we label these things as we go? I'm going to label this pointing dude. And let's add in our image. When I add it in, I'm going to make the brightness and contrast layer active so it appears above it. If I had pointing dude active, it would add in between these. So I'll go to File and I'll go to Placed. And we're going to grab our surprised fellow. Where are you at, Mr. Surprise? Decroy 2, this guy. And when I drop him in, I want to flip him. So in the contextual taskbar, I'll click Flip. Again, if your contextual taskbar is missing, Window, contextual taskbar. And I'm going to kind of eyeball this guy into place. I want him to be a little bit smaller in size than my one dude, because we're going to have large, medium, small as we go through to create a nice little bit of layering effect to kind of help create this feeling of reduction of space. And when I'm placing this, I'm going to try to get his hand kind of nicely outlined by this section right here. Maybe a little bit bigger. Yeah, that looks good to me. I'll click Done. Let's go ahead and add in our other figure. So I'm going to come up to File, and I'll go to Place Embedded. I'll grab Decroy 3, wherever he is. There it is. The one that's shushing us. And somewhat entertainingly, we also need to flip this guy because he's the wrong way. Ba-doop. And I'm going to make him smaller. And I'm going to bring him up here. And again, the main thing that I'm looking at is large, next in size, next in size. And I'll click Done. Let's go ahead and remove their background. So with either one of these active, it doesn't really matter because we're going to do it to both. I'm going to click Remove Background. And I'm going to come down to this one and also click Remove Background. And we can see that in this case that this does an excellent job. It correctly identified the figure from the background and removed it. So we don't have a lot of more work to do there. These blue boxes are starting to bother me, so I'm going to hide them for a minute. So where I have my Move tool active, I'm going to click off this, and now we don't have those blue boxes kind of always sitting there. Now what I want to do is I want to soften the edge of this image. So you see how we have this nasty little hard edge right here? And that nasty hard edge kind of gives away the game. It's not attractive, it's not fun in our Photoshop designs. So we want to find some way to hide it. And in this case, we are going to create a feathered selection that we will add to our layer mask. And again, a layer mask is a way of hiding or revealing parts of our image. Anything that's black will be hidden, and anything that's white will be shown, versus like 50% gray would be half shown. So at the top over here on the left, I'm going to click and hold on my marquee tool, make sure I have the elliptical one active. And then where it says feathering, I'm going to click and I'm going to set this to be 50. So this will create a 50-step graduation or soft edge to my image. Then I'm going to click and drag over my figure. I'm going to hold Alt so it's centered on there because I think that works out a little bit better. I'm going to use the space bar to adjust the position. And probably something like that. This will work well for us. Things that you don't want to do is you don't want to have it come down to that hard edge, because that hard edge will then be revealed. So about maybe like so. And I'm going to release my mouse, and I'll release my Alt that was causing it to draw from center. Now, right now, if I used fill, because I want to fill this with either black or white. So again, white would reveal, so that would reveal the background behind him, so that doesn't work. But black would hide, so I actually need to invert my selection. So I'm going to invert it. So right here where I have the invert button, boop, I can tell it's inverted because I now have the outside selected along with this interior oval. And I want to fill in this layer mask part black. So everything outside of that area will get filled with a feathered black. Make sure you have your layer mask active. And then you can either hit Command-Shift-Delete and it will just go ahead and fill that. Or you can come over to the paint bucket and choose black, and that will fill in black as well. And I'm done with the selection, so I'll hit Command-D. Let's go ahead and do the next one. This one's going to be a little bit more work. This is going to be somewhat akin to what we did in the last lesson with the sunglasses where we had to tuck it. So we want to tuck this guy. You want to tuck it behind this guy. Let's do the easy part first. So let's do that ellipse. So Alt-Option, drag, get my nice little oval. Again, I'm not going too far down. I want to keep it in such a way that I don't get that nasty hard edge. And I'll go ahead and release. I need to invert my selection. And I'm going to go ahead and fill, oops, almost did that in the wrong spot. What layer did I have active? I have the wrong active. So I need to make this one active because that's where this guy is. So I need to make his mask, not his, so layer contents active, contents mask. I need the mask active, and then I'll fill that black. And then Command-D. Now I want to hide it behind this hat right here. So I need to make a selection of that hat, and then I will fill it in on this layer mask. So I'll come back down to Pointing Dude, I'm just going to go ahead and click select subject. And we can see the select subject does an excellent job on his hat, completely whiffs a lot of this stuff. But we don't really care about that. We only care about this part where it's touching his sleeve. I'll make that layer mask active again. And what I want to do is fill this in black. It's selected good. I'll click the drop down for the paint bucket and I'll choose black. And I'm going to hit Command D or hit deselect to drop that selection. And now it feels like he is tucked behind that figure. All right, in a lot of 1980s portraits, they had this kind of painting feathery background cloud effect. And we're going to add that to this image. Now, to add in that painting feathery cloud effect, I don't want to have it applied to my figures. So I'm going to make the brightness and contrast layer active. So it will add a layer here below these two figures. And then in a minute, we'll mask this part out. So I'm going to click new layer. It's the box with the plus sign in it. Where it says layer 1, I'll double click and I'll do clouds. And by the way, it might seem a little tedious to label your layers as you go, but just like in programming, if you don't label your variables or other things like that, when you come back to it later, or heaven forbid, somebody else opens up your file, they're going to have no idea what's going on and be really grumpy with you. Or you might be grumpy with, past self when future self has to open up that file. So label your layers. And there's going to be a lot of layers in this one, but not that much compared to some professional work. So when drawing and painting, I'm frequently working with 50 layers. And so I definitely keep those labeled very well. All right, so for our textured background, we'll have our cloud layer active. Whatever foreground background color you have active, we want to switch back to the default. To do that is very simple. So we have the two big boxes and the two wee size boxes. I'll click on the small ones and that resets it to the default colors. Now I want to tell it where I want to add in my cloud. We'll go to filter and we'll go to render and we'll go to clouds. And again, make sure that your cloud layer is active. Now this looks like garbage, so we need to modify it a little bit to fit the scene a little bit better. So we're going to change the way it interacts with the layers underneath it. So where it says normal, I'm going to choose overlay. We can see now that some of the layer brightens and some of it darkens, the one underneath it. And I think this effect is a little too punchy. So we're going to click on where it says opacity, and we're going to drop the opacity down to 25%. And now if we click this on and off, we can see that we've got kind of nice little matte painting background texture quickly applied to this. Finally, we need to make it so it's not affecting our figure. So I'll make the painting dude layer active. I'll click select subject. It didn't do a great job down here, but whatever. Won't be super noticeable for what we're doing. I'll click back onto clouds and I'll click layer mask. And we can see in this case, it's doing the opposite of what I wanted. It's affecting my figure. So pretty frequently when you're working, you'll need to have inverted something and you just didn't. So a really quick way to invert something is just Command or Control I, and that inverts it to what I actually wanted. And you can always find invert up under image mode, image adjustments, and invert as well if you ever need to invert. And you can see that as I'm inverting it, I'm going to hit Command I a couple of times. We can see that it's just inverting my layer mask. And I've inverted my layer mask in a way that it is now only affecting the background and not the pointing figure. Because again, black, no effect, white, full effect. Okay, now looking at this image, we've got some more adjustments we need to make. So this one and this one appear different than our main figure. They appear a little wrong in color. So this one is a little yellow and this one is very yellow. So we want to adjust their colors. So I'm going to make the surprise dude active because I want to put an adjustment layer directly above it. And then I'll go to adjustments and I'll go to hue saturation. And hue saturation is pretty straightforward. We've got a hue slider, woo, what color? We've got a saturation slider, get funky, and we've got a lightness slider, get darker or brighter. Now we can also target certain colors by where it says master. We can click and choose a set of colors that we want it to be more focused on. In this case, I am going to choose yellow. And in yellow, we're going to make some fairly modest adjustments where it says hue, literally what color. Type in -4. We can see it gets a little bit redder. And then under saturation, we're going to make it a little bit less punchy and we're going to do -32. Now, vexingly, we can see that it is affecting all of the layers underneath it. So it doesn't affect this guy because he's above it, but all of the layers underneath it, the surprise dude and the pointing dude And in this case, it would also affect the grayscale image. It's grayscale, so it's not really doing much. We can see that it's affecting all of those layers, but we only want it to affect the surprise dude. So we could bring in our layer mask up here. Like, that'd be easy enough. Alt drag up. Boop. And that would work. But like, there's an easier way of doing it. So rather than copying the mask up, I can make something called a clipping mask. And a clipping mask means that the layer that you put the mask on only affects the layer directly underneath it. And there's two really easy ways to make clipping masks. So if I have my adjustment layer active in properties, there's this button right here. Kind of think of it as the hey, this guy button, because there's an arrow pointing down. So I say, hey, just this guy. And I get a hey, this guy arrow on this adjustment layer. And we can see now that it only affects that one layer. Another easy way to do it is to hold down Alt or Option and mouse over the line between the two layers. And that allows you to quickly add or remove a clipping mask. All right, let's do the same thing to the layer above it. And the reason why we didn't chain it between these two is because we're going to do slightly different adjustments for this one, because it needs to be pushed a little bit further. So we'll go to Adjustments, we'll go to Hue Saturation. Where it says Master, we're going to pick yellows, and where it says Hue, again, literally what color, we're going to use the same value of -4, but for the saturation, because it's much punchier, we're going to do -60 instead of -32. Just like before, we can see we have the problem that it's affecting everything. So we'll make a clipping mask. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and I'm going to mouse over the dividing line between the two layers, and I will click, and we can see now it only affects that layer in the background. Neat. All right, in these 1980s pictures, pretty frequently these images will fade as they move away from the front of the frame. So I'm going to make my surprise dude active, and I can double check that it's the surprise dude by poking it in the eye. And I'm going to reduce its opacity to 80%. So it's 80% apparent, so it's a little bit transparent now. Then I'll do the shushing guy. Again, I can double check by clicking the eyeball, and I'm going to drop this one down to 50%. And so now, again, we have this kind of accentuated layering effect throughout the image to kind of really help sell what's going on. Finally, looking at this, I think that initial brightness and contrast adjustment we did wasn't quite enough. So let's do one more brightness adjustment to the whole image. I'm going to make that hue saturation layer active so it appears at the top of my layer stack, affecting everything underneath it. I'll go to Adjustments, and we're going to use a fancy one called Levels. Levels is one of my favorite types of layer adjustments because it really has a lot of control to it. So I have a slider here that allows me to add black to an image. I have a slider here that allows me to add white to an image. And then I have a midpoint slider saying, please have more black or have more white overall throughout the image. Underneath that, and you might need to scroll down depending on the size of your screen. It might look something like this. There'll be a little scroll bar. You can adjust it over bigger by clicking between the two layers and dragging. But we have this one right here. So we have a please remove black from the image, or please remove white from the image. So very handy. Now, when working with photography, when you look at this bar graph right here, a histogram, you'll see often a hole on the right or a hole on the left. And what you'll want to do most of the time is drag the closest slider to the edge over to that point. And that will make sure that there are true white or true black tones in the image. In this case, I want this one to say 233, just adding the barest amount of pure white into the image. And that'll make it look a little bit more contrasty and more attractive on computer screens and in prints. Okay, let's add in our text. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, Command-, and drag up a little bit to give myself plenty of room to add my text down here at the bottom of my screen. When adding my text, I want to make sure that this layer right here is active so it appears at the top of my layer stack. I'm going to come over to my toolbar and click T, or click T on my keyboard. And I am just going to click. I am not going to click and drag, because click and drag gives me an area that fills with text, versus if I click, which gives me a transformable box for my text. I'm going to type in the 1780s are back. Let's go ahead and highlight that text so it's active, and let's change some of the formatting for it. So up at the top, I'm going to pick Arial Black if that's not already active. If it's not for you, click here and start typing in Arial, and you should see Arial Black as an option. One of the reasons why we're using Arial, by the way, is that it's on everybody's computers. We'll get to later chapters where we look at fancy fonts, but for the start, we're picking standard fonts because they're standard. For size, we're going to do 180. And I don't really care too much about the fill. You can have it be whatever for now because we're going to use a special kind of fill here in a second. And I'm going to grab the move tool and let's bring you down here because this is where you're going to end up, somewhere around about here. We're going to modify it a little bit more, but this is a good starting spot for it. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to add some of those layer effects to it to kind of make it look fancy. So with the T for text layer active, I'm going to come down and click on the FX. And let's start with stroke. Let's give it an outline to make it easier to read. For my size, I'm going to do 20. For my position, I'm going to do outside. And the answer almost always is outside. So like if it's going around the outside of my text versus the inside of my text versus centered on my text, almost always you're going to use outside. Blending modes is the same thing from Photoshop, from the layered panel, same thing with opacity. We're going to leave those default. And for fill color, I'm going to go ahead and click. And I'm going to pick just kind of a nice obnoxious pink. So I can change what color here on the slider, and then I can click in here to get a nice obnoxious pink. And I'll click OK. Let's do a couple more, so don't click OK here yet. We're going to move a little bit further along. We're going to add a gradient overlay, so a gradient inside my text. So I'll click here. And where it says color, I picked color overlay. I want gradient overlay. There we go. Where I have this gradient right here, I'm going to click here. Excuse me, I'm not going to click here. I'm going to click here. So you see how like there's two different things that happen versus if I click the arrow versus I click the white bar. I want to click the arrow. And it's irritating, but welcome to Photoshop. And I'm going to go ahead and pop open these pinks. And I'm just going to pick this last option because that'll look good for us right now. Finally, let's add in a drop shadow. So I'm going to click here to start my drop shadow. Multiply in black is fine. Where it says opacity, let's do 100%. Pretty frequently, you won't want 100%. The background here is dark enough that 100% will work out a little bit better for us. Angle is like where the light is coming from. And 30 is not bad, but I like 120 for my light, so it's coming in from top left. And then distance, like how far away is everything, so 75. Spread, like how much bigger is it going to get? I'm going to do 10. And for size, like how big is it going to be? I'm going to do 20. We can see that we get a nice little drop shadow behind there, help kind of creating this 3D effect and helping offset it from the image. And I'll click OK. Now, if I click effects on and off, we can see that we go from incredibly difficult to read to much easier to read. Although that said, this gradient that we added on the inside right here actually reduces our ability to read it. But like it also makes it look cool. So we're going to go with that. Not all of the things we do always increase legibility. Sometimes it decreases legibility. All right, I'm going to drag my text down. Oops. I want my text layer active. There we go. And I'm going to drag it down so that it is about the same distance from the bottom as it is from the sides. Then I'm going to hit Command T to transform, and I want to kind of stretch it up taller. So I'll mouse over the center and start dragging up, and we can see, unfortunately, that it stretches everything at once. So while I'm dragging, if I hold Shift, it allows me to distort my text. I'm just going to drag up to about yay. I'll click Done, and I'm going to bring it back down again a little bit to kind of better position it. So 1780s are back. This is also why we didn't care about it messing up that little bit down here during that selection for hiding the clouds from that, because we're going to throw text in front of it. Let's do one more thing to kind of help improve the legibility, which is it's actually pretty bright behind this text. So if I darken the area behind the text, because my text is fairly bright, it'll make it a little bit easier to read. And that's a little bit what's going on here with that drop shadow. Okay, so let's add a darkening effect behind the text. So make the first layer, make the levels layer active behind the text. So that way the layer will appear right here. I'm going to add yet another brightness and contrast adjustment. So I'll go over to adjustments and I will do brightness and contrast. And I'm going to label this one text backer so I know what it is. And let's darken the whole image by a lot. Let's do -60. Gosh, Apple, I just love that that button brings up emojis that I never use. And we can see with this on, like that text does pop a little bit more. It's a lot easier to read, but it's also darkening the whole image. So let's make it so it only affects the area down here behind the text. So I'm going to make the text backer active, or the mask for it, excuse me. So, adjustment active, layer mask active, adjustment mask. I can't say this enough. 9 times out of 10, when something isn't working, it's either you have the wrong layer active or you have the contents or the mask active when you wanted the other. So just make sure you have everything active. So mask. I'm going to come over to my gradient tool. I'll click the drop down. I'll go to basics. And I'm just going to pick the first one because I want white through black. So full effect to no effect. And I am going to click at the bottom of my image and drag up. And while I'm dragging, I'm going to hold the shift key so it's nice and straight. And I'll drag to the top to right about even with his finger. And now if we click this on and off, we can see that it darkens the bottom portion of the image with a nice soft transition, so it's not super obvious what we're doing. Okay, let's save our PSD. So I'm going to go to File, and I'll do Save. I'll be like, yo, what do you want to save this as? PSD. Throw this on my desktop so I can delete it. And like that's great. It's a file format that when I close and open this, so if I close it and I reopen this image, what's neat is I still have all of my layers. Cool. So this PSD file format is for saving documents in kind of like a master or storage format, or like a master copy of it. So like if I click this on and off, I can come back and change these all I want. That's one of the big reasons why we use these different kinds of layers, is that this stuff is adjustable and undoable. But I can't send my grandmother a PSD. I can't post a PSD to TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. I need to save a JPEG or a similar file format. So I'm going to come up to File, and I'm going to do Save a Copy. Save a Copy, by the way, is new from maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. Apple changed the way their system worked, and so they had to add Save a Copy before it was Save As. So we'll do Save a Copy. And in Save a Copy, we need to, right here where it says Format, click where it says Photoshop, and pick JPEG. And this will create our JPEG. Now, something that I see a lot of people do in the classroom is like they'll have their Photoshop document, they'll come up here to the top, and they will delete out PSD and type in JPEG. Cool, you just made a corrupted file that's trash. Don't do this. Anything to the right of the period is not yours to modify. It's for telling the system what the file is. So right now it's a PSD. To make a JPEG, you absolutely must click where it says Format and choose JPEG from the dropdown and click Save. If you get this thing, we'll go ahead and just do Max here. That'll be fine. I'll click OK. Now, because we did Save a Copy, we stayed right here with our PSD. Which, by the way, if you go up here and do Save As and you come over to the dropdown, notice that JPEG isn't an option, because Save As will only allow you to save it as file formats that are compatible with how you have the document set up. Let's go ahead and open up with that JPEG, though. So File Open. I'll go to where I just saved that JPEG on my desktop. And we can see that it doesn't have any of those layers. So while this JPEG is good for sharing, I can post it most places. It's a lot smaller than a PSD. I don't have all of my layers, meaning that all of those edits I just made become destructive and I can't easily undo or change them. So PSD, save as your master edit file. JPEG, share me on the internet.